World War II was the most dangerous and destructive war in history. It cost more cash, harmed more property, executed more individuals, and generated more changes than any other war has ever managed to. The nation with the biggest number of World War II casualties was Russia, with 21,300,000. More Russians, both military and civilians, lost their lives amid the siege of Leningrad than did American and British fighters that joined in all of World War II. This contains all of the events, causes and aftermaths of World War II in a nutshell. The war was brought about generally in light of the fact that Germany and Japan were not pleased with the way the geopolitical framework was set up after the end of World War I. Germany was not satisfied with the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which stipulated that they couldn't raise major military forces. It also took parts of their region away and made them pay war reparations. The Japanese felt that they were entitled and required a realm in East Asia and the Pacific. The two of the major forces attempted to settle what they saw as issue with a geopolitical request. When they went too far, World War II began, first in Europe, then in the Pacific. World War II began an era after the war to end all wars. Surely the settlements concocted toward the end of World War I assumed a part, making hatred in nations such as Germany and Austria. Japan, likewise, disliked the mortifying relinquishment of a racial equity statement at the Paris Peace Conference. Dictatorship developed in European nations as a reaction to financial retreat, also the ascent of socialism. National goals and majestic aspirations touched off a contention that would in the long run emit in battlefields over four mainlands. Issues emerged in Weimar, Germany, that accomplished solid streams of revanchism after the Treaty of Versailles that finished up its trashing in World War I in 1918. Disappointments of bargain procurements incorporated the demilitarization of the Rhineland, the restriction of unification with Austria, and the loss of German-talking regions, for example, Eupen-Malmedy and Upper Silesia. Regardless of Wilson's 14 points, the confinements on the Reichswehr, making it a token military compel, the war blame condition, and to wrap things up, the substantial tribute that Germany needed to pay as war reparations and then turn into an agonizing wait after the Great Depression. The most genuine inner cause in Germany was the insecurity of the political framework, as vast divisions of politically dynamic Germans dismisses the authenticity of the Weimar Republic. On account of World War II, there was some short and long whole calculates that added to the flare-up of contention. The terms of the Versailles peace bargain that had finished World War I and the financial effect of the Great Depression both assumed a part in the first place of World War II. Particular people, what's more, belief systems, likewise, formed the occasion that prompted the flare-up of threats in September 1939. Australia got to be included in World War II in light of the fact that of its association with Britain. In September 1939, the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, AIF, was built up. What's more, enlisting started. Australian troops were dispatched to battle in the Middle East and Europe. Be that as it may, taking after the shelling of Pearl Harbor in 1941 and the fall of Singapore in February 1942, the battlefield moved into the Pacific District. The Australian Prime Clergyman, John Curtin, made Australia's first free announcement of war against Japan. Causes of World War II. The Paris Peace Conference was held by the triumphant partners in 1919 to arrange the peace terms of the crushed countries. The Treaty of Versailles forced a progression of unforgiving terms on Germany, which can be seen as adding to the flare-up of World War II. The infamous war blame statement, reprimanded Germany for beginning the war and constrained the Germans to pay a huge war reparations charge, which was, as it were, completely reimbursed in 2010. German domain was given to neighbouring France, Denmark, Belgium, Poland and the recently framed Czechoslovakia. Germany's states were separated between the Allies, including Australia, which asserted German New Guinea and Nauru. The arrangement likewise restricted the German armed force to simply 100,000 men, annulled induction, disbanded the Flying Corps and constrained the generation of weapons in German industrial facilities. This made a precarious economy with mass unemployment and in addition a feeling of disdain and sharpness. The gathering additionally distanced a portion of the Allies. Italy was insulted that it got few advantages for joining the Associates, adding to the ascent of dictatorship in this disappointed country. The meeting, likewise, laid the seeds of the war in the Pacific. Japan was allowed to keep Chinese region it had seized from Germany, however unsuccessfully attempted to present a racial equity condition to the settlement, which was restricted by the British assignment and by Australia specifically. Japan's inability to guarantee its fairness with alternate forces added to the breakdown in Japan's relations with the West and the ascent of Japanese patriotism and militarism. Some long-haul reasons for World War II are found in the conditions going before World War I and seen as regular for both world wars. Supporters of this perspective reword Clausewitz. World War II was continuation of World War I by the same means. Actually, world wars had been normal before Mussolini and Hitler came to power and Japan attacked China. Among the reasons for World War II were Italian totalitarianism in the 1920s, Japanese militarism and intrusions of China in the 1930s, and particularly the political takeover in 1933 of Germany by Hitler and his Nazi Party and its forceful remote arrangement. The quick cause was Britain and France announcing war on Germany after it attacked Poland in September 1939. After his ascent and assumed control of force in 1933 to an extensive part taking into account these grievances, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis vigorously advanced them furthermore thoughts of tremendously driven extra requests in view of Nazi belief system, for example, uniting all Germans, and further all Germanic people groups, in Europe in a solitary country. The security of living space, Lebensraum, for essentially agrarian pilgrims, Blut and Boden, making a draw towards the east, Drang nach Osten, where such regions were to be found and colonized in a model that the Nazis expressly got from the American Manifest Destiny in the Far West and its clearing of local occupants, the end of Bolshevism, and the administration of an Aryan or Nordic purported master race of the sub-people, Untermenschen, of second-rate races, boss among them Slavs and Jews. The rise of Hitler. Toward the end of World War I, in 1918, Germany was vanquished and Kaiser Wilhelm II abandoned, surrendered the throne of leader of Germany. Another law-based government, known as the Weimar Republic, was built up. Numerous Germans rebuked the new government for consenting to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which made it exceptionally disliked. The new government additionally had genuine financial issues to manage. Labourers went on strike, German coin deteriorated in worth, and the economy endured as outside speculators took their cash out. Notwithstanding these issues, the administration of the Weimar Republic needed to manage the danger of paramilitary gatherings, for example, the Nazi brown shirts, Sturmabteilung or Tempers troopers, and the Communist Red Front. Adolf Hitler exploited the conditions made by this political precariousness and the Great Depression. After a fizzled endeavour to seize power in 1923, for which he served 8 months in jail, Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany in 1933. He set up a totalitarian government that guaranteed its frame by decreasing unemployment and expansion, and by promising to restore Germany's national pride. With a specific end goal to comprehend the ascent of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in Germany, it is vital to inspect the compelling conservative developments that increased across-the-board prominence in Europe and different parts of the world in the 1920s and 1930s. The Nazi Party. In Germany, one of the amazing conservative gatherings that developed after World War I was the Nazi Party. Nazism was described by the solid and alluring initiative of Adolf Hitler, bolstered by a little capable inward hover of individuals. Its philosophy was based on German patriotism, hostile to socialism, against Semitism, a confidence in the cut in the back myth, the thought that Germany was not crushed in World War I, but rather was sold out by the communists and Jews on the home front, and the thought that ethnic Germans were racially better than every other race. The Nazi Party endeavoured to seize power in 1923 in Munich in an uprising known as the Brew Hall Putsch. This uprising fizzled, and the instigators, including Hitler, got short jail sentences. After this episode, Hitler was resolved to win control lawfully at the polling booth. In 1933, he was delegated Chancellor of Germany, subsequent to arranging an arrangement with different pioneers. In November 1932, the Nazi Party had gotten 37.3 for each penny of votes, more than whatever other gathering, yet not a dominant part. This was Germany's sans last race until the annihilation of the Nazis in 1945. Europe, moments before the war. Under Hitler's administration, Nazi Germany managed the terms of the Treaty of Versailles by expanding the span of the military, reintroducing induction, resetting up aviation-based armed force, and increasing the production of weapons and ammo. One of Hitler's points in the 1930s was to recover the domains lost by Germany in World War I. In 1936, German troops entered the Rhineland, a local of Western Germany that had been disarmed after the war. In 1938, Germany added Austria, a procedure known as the Anschluss, and debilitated to attack Czechoslovakia. The British and French reaction was to a great extent endure these activities with the expectation that they could dodge war with Germany. This approach of conciliation just urged Hitler to arrange further demonstrations of animosity. The Failure of Appeasement. In the late 1930s, Britain and France were frantic to keep away from another war with Germany. Despite the fact that the Anschluss and the vicinity of German troops in the Rhineland were infringement of the Versailles peace arrangement, Britain and France did not respond forcefully. This persuaded Hitler that these countries would not go to war over German regional extension. The arrangement had given the Sudetenland district, which had a populace of around 3 million ethnic Germans, to the new country of Czechoslovakia. In 1938, Hitler requested that the locale be come back to Germany. There was a meeting which took place in Munich in September, where the delegates from Germany, France and Italy consented to return Sudetenland to Germany. Consequently, Hitler concurred not to make any further claims of a questioned region in Europe. In spite of these affirmations, Germany attacked whatever remains of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. The disappointment of pacification brought about Britain and France embracing a harder line against Germany. At the point when Hitler started requesting the arrival of domains in Poland, Britain framed an Anglo-Polish collusion to ensure Poland's security. In September 1939, Germany attacked Poland. Then France, Britain and its colonies and dominions, including Australia, pronounced war on Germany. The war in Europe. For the initial 2 years of the war, Nazi Germany and its associates delighted in significant military achievement. In a progression of military crusades, they utilized new strategies and hardware to build up a realm that extended from the English Channel to the Soviet Union, from Norway to the African nations of Algeria and Libya. Poland. The attack of Poland, dispatched on 1st September 1939, was the primary sample of what got to be known as Blitzkrieg strategies, lightning war. Notwithstanding the British and French responsibility to bolster Poland, the pace of the German advance made it for all intents and purposes inconceivable for either energy to offer pragmatic military backing. Before the end of September, Poland was isolated between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, with which Hitler had marked an agreement in August. The Phony War. The period after the German attack of Poland in September 1939 is known as the Phony War. Despite the fact that Germany, France and Britain had proclaimed war on each other, up until April 1940 there were no significant fights. There were some ocean fights, yet Britain and France did not assault Germany ashore. Rather, the British developed their quality and arranged to guard France against German assault. The Phony War finished in April 1940, when Germany assaulted and crushed Denmark and Norway. The Battle of France. In May 1940, Germany attacked the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, and France, utilizing blitzkrieg strategies. In spite of dwarfing the Germans, the Allied powers were not able to manage the pace of the German assault. The British government emptied 338,000 British and French troops from the port of Dunkirk in northern France. On 22nd of June 1940, France surrendered, albeit some military units outside of France rejected the surrender and kept battling Germany as the Free French Forces. The Battle of Britain. Germany then turned its consideration regarding crushing Britain. The arrangement for an attack required the Luftwaffe, German flying corps, to pulverize Britain's flying corps before a land- and/or water-capable ambush could be propelled. In the event that the Royal Air Force could be crushed, the Luftwaffe could keep the Royal Navy from meddling with the German attack armada. Confronting hardened resistance, Germany in the long run changed its strategies to concentrate on bombarding Britain's mechanical urban areas, a time of the war known as the Blitz. The British Flying Corps, which included around 450 Australians toward the beginning of the war, was greatly fruitful in opposing the German assaults from July 1940 to May 1941. Around 35 Australian pilots joined in the Battle of Britain. By then, Germany was centred around the attack of Russia, and the danger to Britain had passed. Operation Barbarossa. The top of the Axis crusade in Europe was the Blitzkrieg intrusion of the Soviet Union, which started in June 1941. Codenamed Operation Barbarossa, it is still the biggest military operation as far as labour, zones secured and setbacks in mankind's history. The Axis power was made up for more than 3 million troops, 3,060 tanks and 4,030 flying machines. In 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union had marked an arrangement concurring to stay unbiased if either was assaulted. The attack in 1941 broke this truce. There were a few explanations behind the attack. The huge landmass of Eastern Europe was to offer Lebensraum, which translates to living space, to ethnic Germans, and would give helpful assets to the war exertion. The inspirations were additionally ideological. The Nazis abhorred socialism and considered Russia's Slavic people groups to be racially mediocre compared to Germans. In spite of the way that Hitler had illustrated an arrangement to attack the Soviet Union in Mein Kampf, the attack got the Soviets ill-equipped. Germany won a few noteworthy fights and caught enormous areas of domain, while the Soviet armed force was compelled to withdraw. By November 1941, German strengths were in sight of striking separation of Moscow, the capital of the USSR. In any case, the German strengths were not able to catch Moscow. They were caught off guard for the brutality of the Soviet winter and were met by hard-headed resistance. At the point when the winter of 1941-42 finished and the Germans could move once more, Hitler guided his powers to southern Russia and its oil fields. The German armed force in the end surrendered at Stalingrad in February 1943. All things considered, the Nazi drives still possessed an incredible zone of the USSR, and their control reached out over a large portion of mainland Europe. Shifts in Europe. By 1943, the German strategies had lost the component of amazement and their wartime achievement had topped. England, the British dominions, the USA, the Soviet Union and the Free French forces shaped a cooperation to compel Germany and its associates into an unrestricted surrender. From 1943, the Soviet armed force delivered a progression of thrashings on Germany. By 1945, Germany had been constrained out of a large portion of Eastern Europe, with Soviet troops involving Russia, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states. The Russians proceeded with their development into Germany and achieved the German capital Berlin in April. In Western Europe, the Allies started significant shelling effort on Germany from 1942, at first concentrating on annihilating runaways, yet later besieging modern urban communities. This crusade neglected to essentially influence German assurance or business, and all alone couldn't win the war. The Allies added to an arrangement to attack France. On 6th of June 1944, around 160,000 Allied troops arrived on the shorelines of Normandy in northern France. This operation, known as D-Day, accelerated the liberation of France in August 1944. How the war ended in Europe. In September 1944, Allied ground troops attacked Germany from the west. The Allies kept besieging real German urban communities, including Berlin. In April, the Soviets surrounded Berlin and dispatched a last ambush. Hitler stayed in Berlin to coordinate the barrier of the city from his dugout. Albeit the greater part of the city's populace was activated, the Soviets seized Berlin following a week of battling in the boulevards. Hitler conferred suicide on 30th of April and Germany formally surrendered on 7th of May 1945. War in the Pacific. In the first 2 years, it seemed like Japan had an advantage. Taking after the assault on Pearl Harbor, Japanese constraints immediately involved Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Guam and Wake Island. They likewise vanquished Burma in the west and pushed south through French Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos, and the Dutch East Indies to achieve Australia's doorstep in New Guinea. England and the USA had genuinely thought little of Japan's military capacity. This, together with a component of amazement and the innovative utilization of joint maritime and flying corps by the Japanese, gave Japan an early favourable position. The Fall of Singapore. The fall of Singapore was the biggest surrender of a British drove power ever. It was a vital turning point of the war in the Pacific. It additionally had real ramifications for Australia's worldwide connections. At the time, Singapore was a British state and the key maritime base in the district. The Singapore strategy was likewise a key, some portion of Australia's military safeguard arranging which depended on British confirmations that ought to Japan ever assault Southeast Asia, the fundamental British Armada would be sent to Singapore to handle the Japanese naval force and secure Australia. The Japanese initially shelled Singapore on 8th of December 1941, the day after the bombarding of Pearl Harbor. Around the same time, the Japanese landed powers on the northeast shoreline of Malaya, now Malaysia. Malaya and Singapore were safeguarded by a power of around 85,000 Allied troops, including the 8th Division of the 2nd AIF, and the British trusted that it could withstand any assault. They additionally trusted that the Japanese were unequipped for battling their way down to Singapore through the tough landscape of the Malay Peninsula. Persuaded that any risk to Singapore would originate from the ocean, the Allies centred their barriers on the coast. In spite of solid Allied vicinity in Malaya, the Japanese armed force won a progression of fights more than 6 weeks. In the wake of being held for possible later use, the Australian 8th Division was sent to stop the Japanese advance in January 1942. It endured substantial losses before being requested to retreat to Singapore. The Japanese attack of Singapore went on for only a week, and in spite of dwarfing their foes, the Allies surrendered on 15th of February 1942. In the Malaya-Singapore Crusade, Australian fighters made up no less than 70 for every penny of the Allies' fight losses. Notwithstanding the 50,000 Allied fighters taking detainee in Malaya, around 80,000 were taking detainee after the fall of Singapore. Among them were almost 15,000 Australians. Dubiously, a little number of warriors, including the Australian leader Gordon Bennett, got away on boats to keep away from catch. Most by far of warriors couldn't escape, and 33% of them didn't survive the Japanese captive camps, POE. Turning points. In March 1942, Japanese strengths set up bases on territory in New Guinea with the target of catching Port Moresby. From that point, they could dispatch general plane assaults against Northern Australia. With this risk approaching, Curtin consented to place all Australian strengths under the charge of the American General Douglas MacArthur, some time ago the leader of the US-controlled Philippines. While American strengths were collecting in Australia and the fight-solidified troopers of the 2nd AIF were coming back to shield Australia, it was cleared out to unpracticed Australian civilian army units to stop the Japanese development to Port Moresby. A few fights are distinguished as key defining moments in the Asia-Pacific battle area. Adrift the hugest were the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway. Both included the naval forces of the USA and Australia in helpful endeavours. The Battle of the Coral Sea, 4th to 8th of May 1942, was battled off the northeast bank of Queensland and south of New Guinea. It kept the Japanese from propelling an ocean-construct ambush with respect to Port Moresby. This constrained them to make an area-based strike by means of the Kokoda Track. In the Battle of Midway, 4th to 7th of June 1942, Japanese maritime powers endeavoured to bait a few US plane-carrying warships into a trap to catch the deliberately imperative Midway Islands. US codebreakers scored Japanese correspondencies. The US Navy demolished 4 plane-carrying warships and more than 200 Japanese airships, extremely debilitating the Japanese war machine. The USA would utilize this shortcoming to counteract supply ships taking war materials, for example, oil, weapons, what's more, sustenance, to Japanese strengths in the area. Antiquarians have depicted the Battle of Midway as the most dazzling and definite blow ever among the naval battles. Japan. With expanded US inclusion in the Pacific, Japan got to be drawn into a war of steady loss, implying that both sides endeavoured to wear each other out to the point of breakdown, despite the fact that strengths and supplies were drained. Because of its scarce and weakened forces, Japan tossed unpracticed enlisted people into the forefronts. With Japan on the back foot, the Allies made 2 fruitful counterattacks in 1943. These crusades diminished setbacks by basically maintaining a strategic distance from numerous Japanese bases in the Pacific. The Australian Armed Force was given the employment of cleaning up in the wake of a number of the zones retaken by the Allies. This cleaning up part was exceedingly questionable. Numerous individuals thought the remaining Japanese powers were at that point segregated and postured little risk, and that the battle was basically a misuse of Australians' lives. For the rest of the war, Australia's part changed. The extent of the military was diminished, and more accentuation was put on moving Australians into war-related businesses. The 2nd AIF had been sent in Greece, Crete, North Africa and Syria. Australians of the 9th Division assumed a main part in the attack of Tobruk, 1941, and the conclusive clash of El Alamein, 1942. Many Australians participated in the D-Day arrivals in Normandy, and little Australian units were sent to Borneo, Burma and India. Australian attendants kept on having a part to play in the Pacific. Around 45 Australians even volunteered for a mystery guerrilla mission against the Japanese in China. By late 1944, American B-29 aircraft had bases from which they could strike Japan's home islands. These strikes were exceedingly viable in light of the fact that most Japanese structures made of paper and wood smouldered effortlessly. On 8th of March 1945, a solitary assault on Tokyo executed 83,000 individuals, mostly regular people. Basically, World War II was a battle between the Allies, including England, France, Russia and the United States, and the Axis, Germany, Italy and Japan. While the fight took place in Europe and the Pacific, it was for the most part a battle for world domination. You may as well think of World War II as an inevitable fight between the major forces. Japan was ascending in the east, while Hitler was ascending in the west. Both domains were resolved to protect their sides of the world through force and secure the assets that were situated there. The realms, in their way, the USSR, the United States, Britain and France, needed to associate themselves to stop Japan and Germany. The increasing influence of Hitler, his rise and coordinated effort with other, smaller despots, for example Mussolini of Italy and Franco of Spain, and in addition Hirohito of Japan, shaped the Axis powers which would challenge the countries of Europe and afterwards America in the Second World War.